You're listening to Inclusive AF with Jackie Clayton and Katie Van Horn.
Welcome to the Inclusive AF podcast. This is Katie Van Horn.
And this is Jackie Clayton.
Whoop, whoop. So Jackie and I are in our freezing era.
Yes.
And what that means is that the temperature has gone below 75 degrees in Arizona and Texas. And so we don't really know what to do with ourselves other than cover up. And we're freezing. The end. That's right. The episode. Thanks.
That's right. That's right.
Kidding. All right. So today we have a guest with us that I think will be a very interesting conversation. We're very excited to speak with Dr. Rebecca Eldredge. So Dr. Eldredge, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and then we'll jump right in.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for the conversation. So I'm a licensed psychologist by training, and I had focused starting over 20 years ago on multicultural issues. So that has continued to be the course of my theme of my work and my practice. And now also really focusing on taking that into groups and organizations to support the integration of well-being into the work of change making. So just looking at so many people who are toiling away to change these systems, often at great personal cost, usually the same people doing the most work to change the systems that are also carrying the biggest burdens of the injustice in the systems as they are. And so really looking at how do we, instead of making it an either or, like either you're working and making an impact or you're taking care of yourself, really looking at the ways where we can integrate those two. And that by taking care of yourself, your organization, your people that are leading the change-making process, then you can also be having your best impact. And in addition to the work that I love doing, I'm a mother of a 6-year-old, so lots of busyness in our lives around the adjustment to full-time school and first grade and all the fun that comes with that as well. And where I am, it's about 30 degrees and we have a couple inches of snow.
Yeah, nope.
No.
I'd have a thermos. I'd be like those, I'd have like frozen eyebrows and the people, and I'd have a thermos everywhere I go and a hot water bottle.
That still is my favorite. So I lived in Minnesota for a little bit. And that was always my favorite, was going out in the morning to, go get in the car and the nostril freezing. That was always the one that like got me every time, that I was like, this is not okay. It's not supposed to be this way.
I used to swear I had frostbite. My mom would be so mad at me. She's like, you've been outside for a total of 5 minutes. I'm like, frostbite. I know it's frostbite. I am sure. But I'm glad. Thanks for giving us a little bit of background. And 6-year-old, God bless you. My kids are 23 and 20. And so they're in their new toddlerhood, which is like the 20s, which is so it just gets more fun. But I'd love to jump in. I'd love to know, like, I love your background. If everybody who's listening to us needs to go on to your website, there is some things. I think is it Rebecca A. PhD? Is that your?
Oh, Rebecca E. PhD. So first letter of my last name. So Rebecca E. PhD.
When I went to your website, there were so many things where I was like, when it was like, oh, find your calm. And I was like, whoa, I don't know. I will completely fall apart. I feel like panic is the glue that holds me together. And I think if I calm, I will completely fall apart. So I was really interested in first how you started thinking about just the cultural awareness, like that part of your work. And then also, how does that go into like the calm and feeling deeply? It was something that made me, I was like, I want all the things. I don't know if it's possible. I never thought it was possible. So,
well, I'll say, you're certainly not alone in the idea of calm feeling almost threatening or unsafe, especially when staying on high alert has been a survival mechanism for generations upon generations. When we look at intergenerational trauma, especially, and So it can feel pretty dangerous to think about the idea of being calm instead of being hypervigilant. To answer the other part of your question, so I had early experiences where my life has been very privileged and started out very homogenous in the area that I was from. And yet there were these deep values that were instilled around everybody's worth. And when I started to have experiences where I was recognizing that not everybody was being treated that way, not everybody's experience was matching that, there was a dissonance around that. And the more that I got to know people and had deepening relationships with people from different backgrounds, different areas, different life experiences, whether it be different religions, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ethnicities, the more that I felt my own life was enriched, and the more I realized what I didn't know. And so over the course of time, I kept seeking out different experiences because I guess I didn't want to be ignorant. I didn't want to be walking around not knowing. And I was realizing enough of what I didn't know that I wanted to understand more. And so I was very blessed with opportunities where people were willing to let me in and share more of themselves. And then the more I grew to know and love people, the more invested I became in changing the systems that were preventing them from being whole and healthy and fully realized versions of themselves and the systems that they were in.
I think it's so interesting that you say that. And when we going back to just like generational, when you talk about generation to generation, I think I didn't realize that until I had children, when I was like yelling at my children and being like, I don't even know where that came from. Like, I have no idea where that came from. And yet it felt so familiar to me. And I was like, was that my grandma? Was that my auntie? Like, who said that? Why was that okay to say things like that and not even think anything of it, of being trauma? And then you're seeing now people are becoming more aware of trying to break these cycles of perpetuating trauma, at the same time not knowing what to fill it with. Like, especially as we try to communicate with other people from different backgrounds. I'm curious, like, is there something that you think that you see over and over and over again as you start this work, or when you work with various groups, the same mistakes? Or what are the most common mistakes that you see happening?
In terms of mistakes?
Or it might not be a mistake. Maybe that's a harsh word.
I mean, there are certainly a lot of those. There's so many things. So, I mean, I think, part of what motivates me is seeing the toll that it takes on people. So seeing just enormous amounts of burnout, depletion, compassion fatigue, people feeling like they're taking up smaller and smaller places in their own lives as they try to fit into the boxes that are prescribed to them and overperform in order to meet expectations that they've internalized for themselves or that they're being held to by the systems around them. At the organizational level, I think one of the biggest mistakes, I think that's a good word for it, is I can't narrow it down to just one. I'm going to just throw a couple out there.
Fair.
A mismatch between what people say and what people do is huge. I think we've seen even more so since 2020 that a lot of organizations came forward in the wake of George Floyd's murder and wanted to say something that they thought was the right thing. And then we've seen over the years that unfortunately the same pattern repeating that's kind of always been, which is you say it, but when it comes time to really do something about it, put the resources into it, the time, the money, the energy, the attention, then you kind of want to hand it off to those one or two people and not invest as a whole organization in those systemic changes. So that's a huge one. And then The flip side of that almost is people who are so scared to get it wrong that they don't try at all, or that their trying is so restricted because of the fear that they'll be canceled or that they'll hurt somebody. And so even coming from a place of good intentions, so to speak, that actually causes as much or more damage as making a genuine attempt and being open to feedback and to learning from that feedback along the way.
Finding a great career has always been a challenge. But today, with the massive changes underway in just about every sector of the economy, in just about every country in the world, finding a great new career is even more challenging. And if you're a student, recent graduate, or someone else early in their career, it's even harder for you because you just don't have the experience that those who might be 10, 20, 30 years older than you have. The answer? The podcast, From Dorms to Desks, a podcast by College Recruiter job search site, where every week we take a deep dive into a topic specifically of interest to candidates who are early in their careers and looking for a great part-time, seasonal, internship, or other entry-level job.
So I have a question just on that point that you're making right now, like the not saying anything. So I think, the horrific things that are going on right now in Israel. I think a lot of folks that I'm talking to, it's either they're saying something and it's like, you don't know how, like, the history there. So maybe, so I think that's the other piece of, we know a lot of the historical context in the US and we can point to, here are the things, but when it comes to global issues and some of that, what is your response, or what is your, what are your ideas for how leaders can step up in those spaces where both sides have things that are that they're doing that are not great. There's a historical context that none of us that are not living there or have the deep, knowledge of the background and the history can fathom. So what do you normally, or what would you recommend leaders do in this situation?
That's a big question. I think in some ways you need to be able to create the cultural foundation to have the psychological safety to make mistakes, and for anybody within your organization to be able to speak up and not get it right every single time, because at the end of the day, none of us is perfect. And as you said, there's so much more always that we don't know than what we think we know. I think that I was doing a training kind of in the midst of when this was starting, and the people within the training, identified with the backgrounds, and some did identify as Jewish or Palestinian or had family, friends, loved ones who were over there. And they were also happened to be service providers. So they're also then holding space for other people's trauma coming in. And there was a really powerful conversation about how do you make space for the person that you're talking to and for them to have their emotions and their feelings about this highly charged topic at the same time that you might be having your own. So I think that at a foundational level, you have to go back to the basics and figure out what are the skills for speaking up, for asking questions, for being curious, for being open to and receive feedback. And as a leader, you're primed to model that. Like, you need to be able to model that in order to make it safe for everybody in your organization to be able to do that as well. And so sometimes being willing to say the basics, like, I don't know, or can you tell me more about what you know about that, or how you came to that conclusion, or what is it that's affecting your perspective on that, and being willing to really listen to and understand where that person is coming from even at times where you may vehemently disagree with it. And sometimes being able to find a point of understanding. I think I have one of my downloads is 5 ways to speak up, which is really about just creating some of the basic skills. And if you're not using them and practicing them and role playing with them in safer topics, then it's very hard to transfer them in at times like this.
I'm glad that you said that, because when we talk about
I'm out,
courageous,
Jackie. That was a great answer, just so you know, and I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. That was perfect.
No perfection here.
She was
either.
trying to put you on the spot. She's
No, I was
glad
not.
that you
I know
answered
that was a big question. So
that
thank
was a
you.
big question. I got a little nauseous when you asked the question. I was like,
Okay.
damn, all right, okay. But that is a great answer, because I feel like so many times, especially now, people feel like they have to have a point of view on everything without even, it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I think, my oldest got canceled because they said they wanted a McGriddle. And they got canceled online because someone said, oh, that's at McDonald's and they give money to Palestine. And Clay was like, okay, then what I want is a piece of bread that tastes like a pancake and sauce. Like, can someone make that for me? I wasn't trying to do all these things, but it's interesting on how we hold people, even with leaders, make sure that we're asking within people's area of expertise too. Like, understand where it should be clear as we're talking, like, by the way, this may not be my area of expertise. I can only give you opinion, or I don't have an opinion about that ready because I've never dealt with that before. To be open to having conversations so that you can actually form an opinion through conversation. But so many times I feel like these days people ask questions similar to Katie, no harm, no foul, but like where it's like people are really afraid of saying, I don't know how to answer that question. And people get really angry. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't have sidewalks in your neighborhood. Like, let's talk about that. Like, before, we're getting really big. Is the answer, what are we trying to solve? What's the problem that we're trying to solve here? And if we can find alignment, and it kind of goes back to what you're saying, when so many people are afraid of saying something, but they still want to help. If you can rally around the question being, how can I best help in this situation? What is there something that you see that I may have, whether it be a contact or an organization or a relationship that I can share that can help us get to a solution in a calm way, which kind of brings to a question like, how do you have these conversations where one person is really emotional and the other person isn't? Because I've seen people get really mad because I didn't respond. I didn't match the energy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you have conversations when people are, my personal mantra is, I don't fight with people that are passionately wrong or overly passionate about or passionately right. I just don't. So I fall into that same category where it's like, I'm just not going to say anything because they seem so passionate. So do you have any recommendations for when you're talking to someone who's really passionate and you're really trying to educate yourself and listen, but they just seem so angry?
Yeah, one of the centerpieces of my work centers the nervous system responses, and which is exactly what you're talking about there. So looking at when somebody's in a state of so much heightened emotion, are they even regulated enough to be having a conversation where they can hear what you have to say? Because there's only one state of our nervous system. This is based on polyvagal theory, but there's only one state of our nervous system where we can really accurately read and hear other people. I think one of the things that's really fascinating that I learned about this is that one of our inner ear muscles, the one that happens to be tuned to the range of human voice, actually turns off or kind of shuts down when we're dysregulated, so that we can be more vigilant of the range of sounds that are traditionally or historically have been signs of danger. So So literally we hear one another differently when we're dysregulated. If we're in a state of fight or flight, if we're in a state of freeze, for example, then we're more likely to misread things on the side of danger because we're in a survival mode. And there are important aspects to that. Clearly, we need that. But when we're spending more and more of our time in that because we're constantly perceiving signs of danger, so then you're in a conversation with somebody and that person is perhaps dysregulated, then at that point, there's not a lot that is going to be effective or useful for you to start arguing back anyway. That in order for you to have a productive conversation, you both really need to have the space where you can be in the ventral vagal zone, where you can hear one another, respond to one another, communicate effectively. So in a lot of ways, to Jackie, to your question, I think the first thing is, how do you just re-regulate the conversation to be in a space where, like, okay, like, what's going to create more safety here in order to talk about this? And did we lose her?
Yes, but she'll come back. All good. So I think, kind of following that thread, we know that for people of color, people doing this diversity, equity, and inclusion work, that is one of the toughest pieces, is that you are constantly in this, fight or flight mode, and having to be the person that is always regulated, even when you might be dealing and processing with some of these things yourself, kind of as you just mentioned with the other concept they were talking about. And so, we know historically Black women specifically have had to step up and step into so much of this work and have carried that burden for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to kind of open that up with, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think I agree with you. I've seen that. There's lots of evidence that shows that. When I'm working with these women, women who are racialized, Black and brown women, they have so few spaces to really tend to and take care of themselves. I mean, because they're incredible women, and so they're also leaned on so often in the workplaces, yes, but also by family, friends, sororities, churches, communities, often volunteering. So they're giving and giving so much of themselves. And I think, one of the things that I see them really comment on and benefit from the most is when they have that person, that place, that group where they can be fully themselves, be real with whatever they're feeling in that moment, because it's probably not all of the different areas of their lives. In fact, for a lot of them, I'll hear like, this is the only place where I really can talk about this or can share this, whether it's in individual work, or whether it's in a small group program that I have. And so when people can find those people in those spaces that are really safe for them, they can get so much out of it that allows them to find pockets of support, of understanding, of really being seen and heard, and having that mirrored back to them, having the fullness of all that they are mirrored back to them, so that they're not losing that sense of really who they are. Because so often I also hear the imposter syndrome, that there's so much reflected in the world that keeps kind of taking bites and eating away at the confidence of who they really are. And so it's powerful for them to be in spaces where they actually can really connect to that part of themselves in full again, and give themselves also that encouragement or that permission, or receive that affirmation and that encouragement that who they are and taking care of themselves is absolutely essential. There's one statistic that people who experience injustice in the workplace, which applies to pretty much all of the Black and brown women that I know. Their odds of experiencing a major health disease or health crisis increase by 35%. So that means that their odds of suffering a major health crisis go up to 55%. And I find that statistic to be so alarming, but also so sad, because I mean, I see it from high blood pressure, diabetes, heart issues, asthma, arthritis, like it's pervasive. And now you're dealing with medical appointments, medical bills, medications, side effects, costs of medical services, the time out of work, childcare. So, I think that, when I have my heartstrings pulled in this way, like I see the real faces of the women and the people who are suffering under these systems, and how much of a difference it makes when they are affirmed in their worth and can take the time and the opportunity to connect to people who will further reinforce that.
I love that. I think that's one of the pieces that, again, like we know these things on a certain level, but to really have it brought home to us when it is close to home with folks that we know, or folks that, we work with or care for, or whatever it might be. And to see the manifestation of all of this work, and it sometimes, yes, does turn into that health crisis, or whatever it might be, because there is not a lot of time for self-care. And, I have shared on this podcast before, I can take off my DEI hat when I go to the grocery store, or when I am at home, or whatever that might be. And for folks that are subject to so much of this marginalization and so much of this historical, just discrimination, disrespect, whatever words we want to put in there, it is just such a struggle of how do you constantly switch into different personas, different modes, depending on who you're working with. How you're going to deal with a child that's dealing with something at school is different than how you're going to deal with a colleague versus how you're going to deal with the leader of the company, all of these different things. And so I love the idea of just having those spaces where folks can share what's really going on and how they are really feeling. And that's one of the things that I'm very proud of, the fact that Jackie and I both we try to do that and hold space, especially obviously on these episodes, but then outside of that, with folks that we know who are doing this work, that it's a lot of stuff, and it feels like it's never ending. So, turning from that and kind of shifting just a bit, what are the positives that you see kind of going on in some of this work right now? Whether that's, community, whether that's, the social justice issues, things like that. What are you seeing that's giving you hope?
I'm so fortunate because I get to see and meet amazing people who are really making a difference all over, in various communities, organizations, whether it's K through 12 education, higher ed, human resources departments, DEI positions, politics, health equity work. And so, a lot of my hope comes from getting to have a perspective that's not just based on the news headlines that I'm seeing that day, and seeing the investment, the amazing people that, way more brilliant than I can do on these really huge levels. And, I want them to be able to be healthy while they're doing it, but because I see what they're capable of and what they're accomplishing, even when they're not healthy. I just think about how much more expansive that will be if we can continue to support and empower everybody who cares. And I do think that, again, when we get away from some of the news headlines and sensationalism of the day, that there are millions of people who want to do better and who care and who see perhaps more than in the past. I started this work over 20 years ago, so I've seen a lot of change even within that time. And I do feel hopeful that more and more people are realizing how important it is, and that the younger generations are so invested in making a difference and doing things differently than how it's been done before.
Awesome. I think those are having that hope, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, just hearing the stories of the work that's being done and the change that's being made, and knowing that, like, even those small things that you're like, is this really going to make a difference? Is this really going to make an impact? Starting to see some of those come to fruition, and, taking it kind of to the HR side of things, when we put a DEI statement on a job posting, or when we, do some of these simple things, blind resume reviews, whatever it might be, how that actually starts to impact who's coming into contact and who's coming into our funnel for joining the company, or whatever it might be, having the ability to really wade through that and say, even these small little tweaks that we're making to a process or to whatever, that's helping to change the bigger picture and helping to, kind of have folks join us on this journey. Because I think that's part of it too, is that it definitely is a journey. So, Jackie, thanks for coming back. We were talking about you while you were
I was
gone.
gonna leave. I know. I was like, maybe I should just go make a burger because I don't know what's happening today. Thank you for welcoming me back. I'm glad you're talking about people doing the work on the journey. There's a lot of work to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel in talking about that, I'm hiring for like a VP of people, and I'm seeing close to 3,000 people apply. And some people was like, oh, it's just a lack of jobs that are going on right now. And I was like, I don't think so. I think it's more reflective of organizations that people want to join and challenges within their own organization of looking for an organization that's trying, makes a big difference or wanting to join.
Mm-hmm. I think that's huge. I think the data support that as well. Like, we're seeing, so many people are burned out, and toxic cultures is the number one reason that people are leaving, and the companies are losing their valued resources of people. And so, yeah, I think people are really realizing that there is another option. I have this conversation with clients sometimes where they're like, but aren't all organizations going to be the same? And, unfortunately, they've worked in multiple organizations where it felt like every organization is going to be the same. And I'm so thankful when I can say, like, you know what, I do know there are some organizations that are doing it differently. And I'm hoping that more and more will be moving into that category as they feel the pressure, whether it's because of their own motivation to do what's good for their people, or because they can't afford not to.
You really can't. I keep learning more, and I think for Katie and I, around this time around Thanksgiving is always kind of a reminder. I feel like it's a good baseline when you think about, like, what do you eat versus what I eat, and then it's like those are core things to who I am, and we're not the same. Like, we're always like, we're different. And it's okay, because we can learn. One of the funniest things that I always have to explain, we had a guest for Thanksgiving, is why we eat sauerkraut on Thanksgiving. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And then when I tell them it makes sense, but yet not, right? But then you have to think about, what are the other things that I do that makes absolutely no sense, that's been passed down generation to generation, and is it time to make a change?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we don't need to buy.
Thing. I just found out.
Yes, it's a Baltimore thing.
It's a Baltimore thing. I did not know that. I mean, like, you said that and it didn't register, and then someone else, and I was like, oh, she wasn't lying.
I wasn't. Oh, I'm glad.
She didn't just
after
make
all
that
these
up.
years of friendship that someone else let you know that I was not lying.
Well,
but I didn't even know how many of us knew that Baltimore was founded by people from Germany, and like how many of us, now if we can just figure out why they say like mother in Baltimore, that's not German. That's a whole nother cultural thing. But you also realize that it made me think about like how we treat each other, or having proximity to power makes a difference on how you're raised, even if we're both women or we're both Gen Xers or we're both these things. Like, I think one of the examples that we were talking about that I try to share internally, and tell me what you will have an opinion about this, but in people, we're looking at performance feedback and how people interact with each other. And one of the things that I deal with in my role from an HR perspective are conflicts between bosses and who they work with. And what I noticed coming into an organization where you treat everybody the same is where the trauma actually lies. Like, you not micromanaging me, it feels like a weird abusive relationship. And now I feel like you're not giving me enough attention because I don't know how to act when you give me the autonomy. I don't know how to act now. I don't know how to do my job. And now I'm afraid, and trying to explain to people like, no, don't depend on people. Some people culturally are not taught to ask for the things that they want. They're taught to do with what they have. Those are the types of things that I realize culturally make a big impact on how we do this work, and being able to show up, or saying, oh, well, just ask, can be a very uncomfortable place because I don't know how to ask, and I don't know what's appropriate or what's not appropriate. And it's just time to realize that I'm glad that you have a course about how to like stand up for yourself, or how to take action and speak, because it oversimplifies it to say it's about communication. But so many of these things are learning to express what I need, why I need those things, and how you can help so that we can get to the end. Once you do it, it sucks for a week, but after you go through that week, it's so good. But that's why I think people quit doing this work. I'm like, this is the step where most people will just give up. It's this uncomfortable that we're all sitting in this room where it's like we have to have a chat.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's so uncomfortable. It's so much sensation, especially if we're not used to it, we don't have experience with it, we're not sure how it's going to be received or perceived. You know, one of the things, I'm certified as a Step Into Your Moxie certified facilitator, which really focuses around a lot of the practice with these conversations. And the person who created it, Alexia Vernon, she made it so that it's really fun. It's a lot of role play, it's a lot of improv, there's a lot of laughter involved, but it's like that process of helping people to just get into their body and really be able to tolerate and move through some of the sensation that comes up, so that you can build those muscles just like you would with anything else, going to the gym or learning a new hobby. There's a research that shows that it costs about $7,500 every time an employee doesn't speak up within an organization. So it's costing organizations on all levels to not equip their teams with the safety and the skills to be able to speak up when they see an issue.
And I think that's such a big piece to it, like the fear and how is this going to be received? Am I going to get in trouble? How will this impact my performance review later in the year? Whatever that might be. All of those things that absolutely do impact who's going to speak up or not. We had the great fortune of being able to hear from Lovey Ajay Jones and at Work Human this past year. And one of the things she's talking about is just that, she feels like she always has to be the one that speaks up. And, and she talked about, who's in the room that could also speak up, or, the people after the meeting that come up to you and say, oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I wanted to, but I just didn't think it was a good idea for me to do it. And, and the work that a lot of folks are putting in, that it's always on them. It's always up to them to say something or bring up the uncomfortable piece of whatever's going on. And so, I think we have to stop relying on those folks that are always the ones to raise their hand and say, hey, let's think about this differently. But we also have to be open to listening. And I think that's the other piece, is not the, okay, yeah, we heard you. Oh, we know you always complain about this thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
because then a few people are also getting labeled as like the troublemakers or the problem people. Oh, now this person is going to speak up again. And I wonder how often leadership realizes all the little back channel comments that come around later. Oh, I'm glad just like you said, I'm glad you said something, or I wasn't sure what to say, or I was too nervous, or, and I have these conversations with people a lot because so often there is an only or one of the few, and then they're in a position where like, am I going to speak up again? Or am I not going to speak up this time? But then no, not being able to count on anybody else to do it. And it's a terrible choice to be faced with, to feel like either I have to keep being the one to speak up over and over and over again at cost to my own well-being, or I don't speak up this time, but then nothing gets said or done about it. And it just passes by and the same problems keep replicating.
I can't do it. I think there's definitely, I don't know. There's a name for it. There has to be where I'm like, I think Katie has the same illness. We'll sit for a minute and then it's like, I have to say something. Like I can't not say anything. And sometimes Katie and I are very close. So sometimes we end up doing it for each other, which is even more hilarious and scary to outside people who don't, they're like, what's happening? And I'm like, Katie wants that. So give it to Katie. Like, what?
Well, that's amazing that the two of you have that where you can rely on one another and know that one or the other of you is going to speak up if somebody needs a break. Just having those people that you can count on makes a huge difference.
That's true.
I agreed. And I think that, that kind of goes to your earlier point on having those spaces where folks can be comfortable sharing and being themselves. And, Jackie and I talk a lot when we have guests on about, and Jackie says this much better than I do, but, you don't want my whole authentic self to come to work. And so
Right.
there's that piece as well. It's how do we make sure that we are keeping ourselves safe, but also sharing what we can to kind of better the conversation or better what's going on.
And I guess I'm curious about that because I'm thinking who does and who doesn't want the authentic selves of the people that they work with to come in. And, there's a lot to that, I think, in itself. Like if you're saying like, that the people that you're working with wouldn't want your whole authentic self to be there, then I think there's a lot that is underneath that as well about what that means and what kind of culture there is around safety and really welcoming all types of diversity.
I find like it's funny. I was raised. It's kind of like this example of success as a level of healing. Like it's really success in place of healing. Like there's no healing there. It's just a different form of trauma of trying to be successful will somehow wipe out the trauma that has been there. And as a result, my dad used to do this thing that I used to think was so funny. He would say, you knew when he was really angry at his peak because he would say, let me explain to you how I saw this going. And then I'd like to hear how you saw this going. So I saw this going. I was going to say this. You were going to say that. You were going to give me what I wanted. I was going to thank you. And the conversation was going to be over. But obviously that wasn't how you thought. And that's how, which was really helpful to hear that, where it was like, so that you could break it down and say, okay, this is how I anticipated this coming out. And obviously you did not see it going that way. But it was also like to take a pause because it was understanding that these are the things that could potentially happen and you have to keep going through this trauma or something that's going on. And I think that it's so important that we give people the space of being themselves, which sometimes means I'm not going to be able to show up this time. I'm going to need to take a step back, and I need someone to step up and take some of this issue or see this issue through, or offer that support. And I think that's the part that is harmful on the other side of the spectrum. People who aren't afraid to speak up, but maybe, I've got other things going on. I think the quote that I say a lot is, I have a whole ass job. Like when people ask me like, can I pick your brain for a minute? And I'm like, dude, like I can't for this one. No, you can't. And I need it. I need that piece of brain,
Yeah. But I think that's also the expectation. So it is, how do you balance that? And when are those times? And I think you do a very good job of this, but also Jackie we're working on boundaries. We're working on how we say no sometimes.
2024 is the year of the no for the third year in a row. This time I mean it.
He means
That's
it this
huge.
time. Yeah. The 7 podcasts she's doing, the 22 different jobs she has, the volunteering, all of these things. So she just makes me tired most of the time. But I think, first off, thank you. I think this has been a really great conversation just to think about this in a different way, because I think a lot of times we're having these conversations or thinking about this and creating those spaces to be open, but also having other folks listen in to what you're hearing, what you're seeing as you're working with the people on the front lines doing this work is amazing. So thank you. I would love to know what are 1 or 2 things that you would like our listeners to have heard from this conversation? Or, what are the things that you want to make sure they carry with them?
Well, if you're an individual listening and perhaps you identify as a woman who's Black or brown, or racialized, or in other ways experiencing the consequences of the injustice that's embedded in the systems, then the most important thing that I wish I could emphasize is just how much your own well-being matters, and that it does not need to take away from the impact that you're having in the world, that it really can enhance it, but that it's absolutely essential, because I've just seen too many times where people at great cost to themselves sacrifice, and ultimately that it hurts them and it hurts everything that they've been working so hard for. And at an organizational level, if you're a leader, if you're somebody who is in a position where you hold power and decision-making influence, then the most important thing is, how are you taking care of the people within your organization that are carrying this load? As we talked about, people are leaving organizations, they're looking elsewhere to find the places that are going to match the values. And if you want to keep these amazing people within your organization, then you also need to be a part of not just listening to what they have to say about changing the systems, but supporting them in the long, hard road of changing the systems so that they are getting their needs met and their well-being. And I think that is a huge missing piece in a lot of organizations, is really looking at what they can do organizationally to support the people that are in positions and being tasked with the change making.
Awesome. Thank you. Jackie, what you got?
I just am going to say, and I've never done this. We've had hundreds of episodes. I've never done this. I really want people to tie in to Dr. Rebecca Eldredge's work, because I feel like so many of our listeners do this work and don't know how to do this work from a place of calm, or don't have their batteries recharged in a space. I mean, we have coaches, we might have therapists, but there is a special understanding of trying to change the world and take care of yourself at the same time. And so some of the things that I saw in just researching the background, I want other people to research those things of trying to get that guidance and support, whether you as allies. And I think everyone who does this work is an ally of some sort of trying to do this. And so I want people to look at Dr. Eldredge's work, but then think about self-care as you go through this space. I'm going to encourage people to do that today.
Awesome. I love it. I'm going to kind of circle back to one of the first things that we were talking about, and that is that dysregulation and how that can impact the work that we're doing here. And I think all of us have been in that space where we've been angry or frustrated or overcome with emotion or whatever it might be based on what's going on around us in the world. And, you know, we're in full swing of that holiday season. And so that dysregulation, regardless of what boundaries we've set, our family is usually a good trigger to knock those boundaries out. So being aware of that and being aware that, you know, when you are dysregulated is not the time to approach these conversations. And, but knowing that, but then also stepping away, and not engaging to save your own sanity, your own well-being, all of these things, I think is really critical. So, thank you for joining us today. We truly appreciate it. And this is Katie Van Horn.
And this is Jackie Clayton.
Bye.
Bye.